Hi, welcome to episode 12 of Got a Story for You. I'm Phil Giunta, and in this episode, we're going to launch a three-part story from the Middle of Eternity speculative fiction anthology series that I've been reading from for several episodes. In this case, we're going to go to book 2, which is Elsewhere in the Middle of Eternity, for a story set in Ireland, where two sibling scientists unwittingly discover an ancient artifact that regenerates severed limbs while healing old family wounds. The story is called Life and Limb. I hope you enjoy it. County Galway, Ireland. Michael Whalen slid into the seat opposite his sister, outside Capante Tea Room, in Galway's Latin Quarter. It had become Amelia's favorite place to meet for brunch, mostly due to its large selection of herbal teas. As evidenced by the crowd, it was also a popular spot for tourists on their way to or from the Galway City Museum. After the waitress took his order, Michael leaned back in his chair and allowed his broad shoulders to slump. Sorry I'm late. Amelia met his gaze silently, twisting her lips into a wry grin. He was all too familiar with that look. I was stuck on the phone. Oh, I thought you were just avoiding me, considering what day it is. Michael sighed and gazed at the gathering clouds that cast a dreary pallor over everything. It was just as well. Their brunch coincided with the anniversary of their parents' deaths 8 years ago. Amelia had been visiting them when a gas line explosion leveled their home, leaving her right forearm crushed beyond repair. I'm not avoiding you, Amelia. This is difficult for me, too. I live with a reminder every day. Yeah, I get it, Mealy. For the love of God, we're in our 40s. I know we've never seen eye to eye on anything, but I was hoping by now we would have at least healed old wounds and moved forward. Did you ever wonder why I gave up a successful career as a surgeon? I was beside myself, forced to stand by while one of my colleagues amputated your arm. After that, all I wanted was to develop the best replacement limb possible for you. Michael reached across the table and cupped his hand around her prosthetic fingers. And there's not a day that passes when I don't wish I could give you more. Amelia's green eyes glistened. She pushed back wind-blown locks of chestnut hair. I'm sorry, I didn't invite you here to upset you. Please don't think I'm ungrateful. She released his hand and gripped her teacup by its tiny round handle. It's quite an amazing machine you've developed. She tapped on the dark gray plastic with her left index finger. The words Limber Up spanned the length of the forearm in bright aqua and orange letters. Although, when the natural arm goes into full production, might I suggest making your company logo a bit less conspicuous? I feel like a walking advertisement. I let you test the most advanced myoelectric arm available with 25 grip patterns and a hand that rotates 360 degrees, and you're novshalling? I'm not novshalling, Dr. Uppity. I'm just self-conscious. You know that. Well, soon, you won't have to be. Once the natural arm is fully approved for production, we'll be able to cover it in silicone and match it to the wearer's skin tone. We can even replicate your freckles. Would that impress you? Yes, but to be honest, your TED Talk last week was even more impressive. Michael nodded. It had been an honor and a surprise to be accepted as a presenter at the Global Conference on Technology, Entertainment, and Design in Vancouver, Canada, earlier in the year. Limb regeneration has been a hot area of medical research for years. 'Tis about time I directed the company's efforts in that direction. I just never expected to be invited to one of the world's largest conferences to speak about it. And to congratulate you, I picked up a little something. Amelia reached down and lifted a thin white box nearly half a meter in length. She placed it atop the table. Flowers? You shouldn't have. Michael opened the box to find a hollow metal forearm, complete with jointed fingers and thumb, curled into a permanent grip. With a raised eyebrow, he ran a finger along its tarnished, scratched surface. When Michael said nothing, Amelia spoke up. Something to decorate your office. I picked it up at the antique show at Ashford Castle. That's about the only way I'll ever see the inside of that place. 'Tis a bit too thin to be armor. At first I thought it had broken off a statue, but I think it might be an antique prosthetic. See how smooth the open end is? 'Tis curved as if to accommodate the elbow joint. I posted a picture of it on a few antique collector forums to see if anyone might know its origins. Haven't heard a peep yet. Wow, this is wild. Thank you. You didn't happen to try it on, did you? No, you arse biscuit. Wouldn't do me much good when handling delicate plants or anything else for that matter. Right, so how goes the phytochemistry business these days? Well, nothing worthy of a TED Talk. But we've a number of projects in development, from several plant-based cancer drugs to arthritis remedies. Fascinating. With a wry smile, Amelia fell silent. The waitress returned with 2 slices of porter cake. After she stepped away, Michael leaned forward. That wasn't intended to be flippant. I know. Amelia lowered her head and gazed at the gray brick pavement. My work's hardly as remarkable as that of my vascular surgeon turned biomedical engineer brother. I'm just the one who plays with plants. At least, that's what Di used to say. It was time for Michael to change the subject. I have some good news. Actually, it's the reason I was late. The Department of Defense is interested in the natural arm. They're sending someone out tomorrow to evaluate it. If all goes well, it could lead to a contract. Well, that's wonderful, Michael. Maybe that kind of investment could help fund your research into limb regeneration. Possibly, but don't get your hopes up. We're decades away from that. Your 8 o'clock is here. Michael's administrative assistant nodded toward the executive conference room. He looked at his watch and raised his eyebrows. He's 20 minutes early. Oh well. Better sooner than later. Thanks, Colette. After dropping off his jacket and laptop in his office, Michael stepped into the conference room and stopped in the doorway. He couldn't help but smile as he folded his arms across his chest and leaned against the door jamb. The trim young man in the red polo shirt and jeans stood just beyond the far end of the mahogany conference table, his back to the door. As Michael watched, he repeatedly raised and lowered his right arm, severed somewhere below the elbow. Michael couldn't determine precisely where, as the man had decided to try on the antique metal prosthetic. He rotated his arm, examining the piece intently. We can do better than that. The man spun as embarrassment ruddied his face. It was nearly the color of his shirt. He smiled sheepishly and began tugging and twisting the prosthetic. It wouldn't budge. Huh, sorry, Dr. Whalen, I was just froostering with this to pass the time. By all means. I just didn't want the Department of Defense to think that was the best I had to offer. Oh, no, sir. We saw your TED Talk. He gave up trying to remove the antique and extended his left hand. Corporal Duncan McCabe. As Michael leaned forward to accept the gesture, he cleared his throat in an effort to refrain from snickering at the corporal's dilemma. And what did you think, Duncan? May I call you that? Aye, of course, sir. Well, the minister was impressed to see technology like this developed domestically. To be honest, the brass had been looking at Touch Bionics in Scotland and a few American companies. But what did you think? Duncan ceased prying at the edges of the metal arm and drew himself to his full height. At just under 2 meters, he was nearly at eye level with Michael. His earlier discomfiture faded as he spoke. I lost part of my arm 3 years ago thanks to a suicide bomber in Afghanistan. Before transferring to administrative duty, I was given a rod with 2 pinch-and hooks. The fact that you produced an affordable, lightweight prosthetic with all the same degrees of freedom and grip patterns as the iLimb or the Bibionic will mean a hell of a lot to people like me. So yeah, I'm impressed too. Even more so with the idea of limb regeneration. But I'll be happy with the natural arm for now. You've done your homework, Duncan. Michael pointed to the tarnished metal arm hanging at McCabe's side. Out with the old, in with the new then? What? Oh, right. The corporal gripped the prosthetic with his left hand. It was stuck a moment ago. This time, when he pulled, the antique slipped off with ease. Sorry about that. What is this, by the way? A wall decoration, compliments of my sister. Now, why don't we take a walk to the lab, strap on the natural arm, and then you can give me a proper handshake. Hours later, the lab was empty. Everyone else had left for the weekend. Michael realized that he was probably alone in the building. Even the cleaning staff had gone. He was tired, but refused to rest until he'd found the answer. He jolted as an obnoxious buzzing erupted behind him. Frowning, he stood up from the microscope and turned to find his sister leaning against the workbench in the center of the lab. She stared down at her myoelectric hand as it slowly and continuously rotated 360 degrees, making a loud grinding noise in the process. Amelia, I had no idea you were here. Can you fix this? I can't control it. Michael opened his mouth to reply, but before a word was uttered, Amelia's prosthetic arm shot forward, its malfunctioning hand clutching his throat. Tighter. Tighter. He sat up with a gasp. Atop the bedside table, his cell phone vibrated incessantly. Damn it! He snatched it up and glared at the screen. The number was unfamiliar. He answered it anyway. Dr. Whelan. Sir, Corporal McCabe here. Duncan. You do realize 'tis 4:15 on Saturday morning. Aye, Doctor, and I'm sorry to wake you, but is there any possibility we could meet? Now? Well, the sooner the better. Is there a problem with the prosthetic? Just the opposite, sir. Duncan, I'm tired. What the hell are you getting at? It would be better if I showed you. Michael's shoulders slumped. For the love of Christ. Right then, meet me at my office. I'll be there in an hour. Stifling a yawn, Michael sat back on the couch along the windows and sipped his coffee as Corporal McCabe held up the stump of his right arm. Michael raised his cup. Where is the natural arm? Oh, in my car. Good place for it. May I ask why? I had a hard time putting it on this morning because my right arm is now 7 centimeters longer than it was yesterday. The young man approached and sat beside Michael. Turning toward him, Duncan held both arms out. 'Tis as if my arm's growing back. The shape's even symmetrical with my left. Look at it, Doctor. Michael downed the rest of his coffee and leaned forward, examining the arm in question. And you actually measured it? As soon as I noticed. Michael held up 2 fingers. May I? Certainly. He gently pressed the skin around the end of the residual limb. Does it feel tender at all? Any pain? The corporal shook his head. I did all that earlier, poking and prodding it. Didn't hurt at all. Michael sat back again and stroked his stubbled chin. How is that possible? Tell me exactly what happened overnight. Well, I removed the natural arm before going to bed. I awoke at 4 in the morning to get a glass of water, and that's when I felt my arm tingling. Mind you, I haven't had any phantom sensations for years. When I turned on the kitchen light, I noticed that my arm was longer. Who else knows about this? No one. I didn't even tell my wife yet, but I will need to report this to my superiors. Let's take a moment here, Duncan. We don't even know how this happened. What did you do after you left here on Friday? The corporal shrugged. Well, nothing out of the ordinary. I showed my wife the natural arm, and then we went to dinner. We watched a movie when we came home, and then we crashed for the night. That's all? McCabe nodded. Duncan, would you mind if I took a blood sample from that arm? Not at all. And can you give me until Monday morning before you report this? I'd like some time to determine how this could have happened, before I have your superiors swarming this place demanding answers I can't give them. Duncan thought about it for a moment. Sure, I guess I can give you the rest of the weekend. Until then, I'll continue to test drive your prosthetic if you can modify it for me. Certainly. Unless, of course, I wake up tomorrow to find my entire arm's grown back. Later that morning, Michael raised his digital voice recorder as he leaned over the stainless steel workbench. Corporal Duncan McCabe's blood sample exhibits higher than normal levels of M2 macrophages. These white blood cells are multiplying at an accelerated rate. Beta-catenin production is also elevated, which could indicate increased activity in the Wnt signaling pathways. These proteins are currently being researched in many quarters for their role in limb regeneration in mice and axolotls, but we're still a long way from producing the same results in humans. Nevertheless, Corporal McCabe's progress is undeniable. Whether it continues remains to be seen. Michael turned off the recorder and slipped it onto a shelf above his workbench. He rose from his chair and paced the lab. There's no way in hell the natural arm could induce this reaction. 'Tis just a myoelectric machine. What then? What could have caused such a drastic growth overnight? Damned if I know. Michael ran a hand over his face and yawned. I need more coffee. He exited the lab and made his way to the caffeine machine behind Colette's desk. As he waited for his cup to fill, Michael leaned against the counter and glanced into the conference room across the hall. His gaze eventually settled on the white box. No. He sat up and made his way into the room. He slipped the antique arm under his own and started back toward the lab. Minutes later, the arm lay atop his workbench. Gently, he scratched off a small section of tarnish, an exposed bare, reflective metal. It appeared to be silver? Let's find out. Lining the lab's sink in aluminum foil, Michael soaked the arm in hot water and baking soda. 20 minutes later, most of the tarnish was gone. Fantastic. Michael ran a finger over its pure silver surface, noticing more scratches than before, and even a few minor dents. For the first time, he peered into the arm's socket. Rather than the gleam of silver, the interior just inside the socket was lined with a mottled band of black and brown. What? Michael reached up to the shelf for a flashlight, knocking over an EMF meter in the process. It toppled to the workbench with a clang. Damn it! He flipped it over and turned it on. Satisfied that it had survived the fall, he slid it aside and aimed the flashlight into the arm, revealing a strip of soft, spongy paste. It measured about 7 centimeters at its widest. My right arm is 7 centimeters longer than it was yesterday. Michael turned the arm over and pulled a flat metal tool and petri dish from the shelf. Gently, he scraped a sample of the substance into the dish, a damp globule of black, tan, and dark brown. He laid the arm down beside the EMF meter and slid the petri dish under the microscope. Some sort of plant residue, I think. He pulled back, letting his gaze drift to the antique prosthetic. Beside it, the reading on the EMF meter fluctuated between 10 and 25 milligauss. Michael leaned forward for a closer look before scooping up the instrument and passing it over the length of the arm. The measurement finally stabilized at 14.5 milligauss. This is incredible. It generates its own electromagnetic field. Amelia, what the bleeding hell have you stumbled upon? We'll find out in part 2. See you then.